And as a young boy back in 1996, I was sold on the dream. They told me if I buy rental property, I will be rich and rewarded beyond my wildest imagination.
You sold off half to pay off the other half, and then the cash flow started coming in at least semi-decently, right?
Well, let's talk about that.
Okay, let's talk about that. Right. What's the worst kind of thing that happened to you during those ghetto-ologist days?
So this guy approaches, he comes into the hallway of the building, and my manager and I are there, and his eyes are coming out of his head. Oh my gosh, this guy's trying to start a problem. He wanted something. Whatever he was on, like I knew right when I grabbed him, and I had adrenaline going, that I wasn't gonna be able to take this guy. Like I didn't know what to do. I didn't have a gun on me. And I grab a hammer. I got this hammer and I'm kind of going like this, feeling the hammer, because the hammer didn't feel very heavy to me. Like usually a hammer would have some weight to it, you know? It was a hammer that was bought at the dollar store. I'm gonna hit him and it's just gonna make him madder at me.
Hey there, and welcome to another episode of the Jack Boss Show, where we talk about everything having to do with real estate, finance, and entrepreneurship. Today, I have the pleasure of interviewing my very, very good friend, Joe Lieber. Joe Lieber is also known, or was known, right, as the resident ghetto-ologist of Cleveland, Ohio. Now, ghetto-ologist means he basically bought in the ghetto. I'll let him explain what it is all about, and we'll talk about your transition out of that, the pros and cons of that, and what you're doing today. Again, you're doing lots of fix and flips right now. You have tons of experience in money lending. So with that said, just welcome, Joe. How are you doing?
Thank you. Thank you for having me on the show today. I'm really happy and excited to be here.
Wonderful. So just for quickly, you and I know each other for how long? Like 10, 12 years, something like that?
Yes. Yeah, about 10, 12 years.
So we both joined a mastermind, the power of masterminding. If you're doing some cool stuff in real estate, you gotta join a mastermind. Like for example, we're just starting our what we call the ultimate boardroom, the really the world's best, largest mastermind for land entrepreneurs. But Joe and I actually met in a real estate mastermind, mostly for, I think most of the people there are house flippers. And for years, I was the only oddball out as a land wholesaler, land flipper, land seller financing guy in there. But Joe and I became quick friends over there. And then actually he and I, we bought, how many houses have you bought for us in Cleveland? 17, 18, 20? Something like that, right? Somewhere
At least,
around, yeah, somewhere around 20 houses in Cleveland. We'll talk about that a little bit. So we became really, really good friends. But I want to start with Joe as the ghetto-ologist. So tell us, first of all, what does it mean to be, why did people call you a ghetto-ologist, man?
So a ghetto-ologist is someone who invests in low-income assets, low income, cheap to get into, D-class, as if you were talking about a classification. And a lot of new investors start that way because they're very easy to get into. It's very cheap. And there's just high ROIs and high returns typically on those assets. So and when you go through and high trouble. So when you're invested in the ghettos, you have all kinds of new challenges and things you have to learn about the ghetto, the way of the hood. So after spending 10 plus years in that asset class, I felt that I was ghetto approved, and I started calling myself. One day we were at the mastermind that you were in, and I was talking to the guys, and they really didn't. They were like, I was explaining things about D-class investing, and they're just kind of like puzzled. I could see the look on their face, and I was like, guys, what I'm trying to say is I'm a ghetto-ologist. And the room just exploded laughing, and it just kind of stuck. It was kind of just a funny thing that we came up with. But yeah, that's what it is. It's low income housing.
Well, I remember when we started buying houses together about 2014 or so, because when the market in all around the country crashed 2008-9, we started buying a lot of houses in Phoenix. And then as the market came back up, stupidly, my biggest mistake, we stopped buying in Phoenix because we're like, market is out of reach, doesn't make sense anymore. We went into other markets, which of course the market kept going till 2022 and doubled another time from there. But hey, hindsight is 2020. But then instead we moved into markets where the cash flow made sense, because we bought in 2009, 10, 11 in Phoenix houses for $50,000, $60,000, $40,000 to $60,000 that in 2007 had cost were valued at $200,000. And then we got $1,000 rent for those houses. Those numbers make sense in every kind of book because we bought them cash. So therefore, a $40,000 house paid cash After repairs, another $20,000. It's a $60,000 house. It produces $1,000 in rent after property taxes, after repairs, after property management and things like that. You're taking home $500 to $600 a month. Great. That was good for us. And if you look at it from a cash-on-cash return, that's a pretty good cash-on-cash return because now you're making $7,200 a year on a $60,000 investment. That's not bad, plus depreciation, plus appreciation over time. All makes sense. What happened then in 2014 is these houses now were worth $200,000. We're like, that doesn't make sense for us anymore to buy something with $200,000, get $1,000 in rent. So we said, Joe, how about we invest in Cleveland? What do houses cost in Cleveland? And he's like, well, it depends where you want to invest. And I remember flying out with Michelle out to Cleveland and you showing us some options of what we could buy, including one of the ghetto-ologist properties. I still have a visual of that property. And I can't believe to this day that anyone would live in that kind of a house. So tell us how your model that you no longer do right now, but how did it work? And you could do it, of course, right now. Still, you just don't want to anymore. There's plenty of houses for that right there. But how did that model work? What kind of property? How did the typical house look like? What did you buy them for? How did the management of it look like? Well, let's dive into some of these things of that Class D kind of product. Go ahead. Let's go ahead.
Sure. Okay. So in Cleveland, Ohio, it's an older housing stock typically. And those Class D assets become a real old housing stock, meaning built somewhere between 1880 and 1925 was the typical buy box.
100 to 140 years old.
Yes, easily. And there's all kinds of challenges in a cold weather market on top of old housing.
Right.
It's challenging. It's different, the different parts of the US because it's a cold weather market. So you're going to have, things expanding and contracting and different things like that. So we would take these houses, we'd buy a 3-bedroom colonial style home. And then I had the genius idea of, of taking the attics and finishing the attics. I would cut a center hallway in. I'd make a bedroom in the front, bedroom in the back, and I would have a 5-bedroom, 1-bath home. And you could buy these homes for $20,000 at that time. I would spend about $10,000 renovating them. How much do they cost
today?
120, 130. Wow. Yeah.
Okay. All right. So even in the inner city kind of areas where you they have gone up that much?
They have. They've really taken off. And then I would buy these homes. I'm sorry, I put them on Section 8.
Okay. So then you got Section 8 renters paying you how much?
At that time, about $950 to $1,000 a month.
Okay. So what typically though happened with those things? So would they wire you the money every month? Would they go and send you a check, or how would collections work on these things?
With the Section 8 program, it's a direct deposit. It comes into your account automatically on the first of the month. And then depending on the tenant, sometimes they have to pay a portion. So a lot of times it's fully subsidized, and then sometimes they got to pay a portion. And their portion just depends on, they're trying to rehabilitate. The idea of the Section 8 program is they take these folks who have a situation going on, and they're trying to rehabilitate. They're trying to get it's typically a mother with a lot of kids. They're trying to get her back to work, get her stabilized, and so her portion she pays can vary depending on where she's at in the program.
Good. So that's one of the area then. And then how many times, how big of a portfolio did you build up at the peak?
I got myself to 217 single family homes at my peak. That was 2014.
All right. So 217 homes like that. Class D, all Section 8?
No, they weren't all Class D. I'll say I probably had about 60 Class D, and the rest were a lot of C's, a little bit of B's, one or two A's.
All right. There. Sure. So let's talk about, so what, were they all Section 8?
No, only about, out of that whole portfolio, I'll say 50 of them were Section 8, 50, 60.
Okay. So let's talk about the rest of them. So Section 8 seems to be fairly straightforward because you get a deposit. Also, Section 8, the tenants have to live up to a certain standard in the place. They can't trash the place, otherwise they lose their Section 8. And so they have to keep it in a certain condition and so on because they get inspected, I think, yearly. Right.
Yes, exactly.
And you have to keep the houses in a certain condition too, in order to not lose your ability to rent in Section 8. Right.
Correct.
Right. So let's talk about the other ones. Not Section 8, no requirements. Did you upgrade them to the same level or a little bit less? And what kind of tenants did you get in there typically?
I went to the west side of Cleveland, from the lower west side to the upper west side of still in the city of Cleveland. Those are my C-class assets. And I did a lot of straight rental, or I did a lot of lease purchase, because I wanted to try to defer. I wanted to put repairs on them because I knew these cash flows can get razor thin, especially if you have a mortgage. To your point earlier, with no debt, you were making about $7,200 per house. Well, if you had debt service, that's say $4,000 a year. Well, that puts you at about $3,000. And then one hot water tank, one furnace, gosh forbid, one turnover, someone had to move out, your cash flow is gone.
Right.
So I had the idea of, I'm going to put everyone on a lease purchase or lease option. Some areas of the country, they call it contract for deed, something to that effect, where when they call me because their furnace isn't working, I'm going to kick that back to them and say, hey, those repairs are on you. It says in our contract, you're on your own. So I was trying to get the cash flow.
Now, how did that work?
I did that. Well, here's what I found after doing that for 10 plus years in that model in the C-class area was, yes, some people wouldn't call, but it didn't mean they were dealing with it. I would go back to these houses after 3 years, and there was just a ridiculous amount of deferred maintenance.
Right.
Or I would find out about it when the city would call. They would say, hey, the siding's fallen off the side of your house. The gutter fell. It's been down for 8 months. And they just wouldn't do the work. Or they would call anyways. They'd say, I don't have the money to put a furnace in. I know it's a lease purchase. I don't care. You've got to get me heat. And legally, by law, I do have to get them heat.
Yeah.
So it kind of didn't really...
It worked for little stuff, but probably it worked for clogged toilet, but probably not for the bigger stuff. Yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah. Because we actually followed your model when we worked together and you ended up buying the houses for us. We did the same thing, but then we handed property management over to a property management company, and they basically looked at us and it's like, we read what the text says, but legally we are obligated to actually help them and get those things working again. So we basically essentially treated it like a rental.
Yeah, the management company was right. That is the law. Yeah.
Yeah. So okay. So you did that, and now let's see. Particularly then, so these houses, Class C houses, you bought them for what, 20, 30, 40K, something like that?
Yeah, around that, well, a little more. Maybe like Class C's at that time were like 30 to 40.
Okay.
30 to 40.
So now if that works well, why did you move away from it?
Well, so here's what happened. So when I bought these houses, how I was buying them was you could buy them so cheap, like 20 grand, 30 grand a house, that I was raising money at that time. I would raise $100,000 blocks from private investors on a 5-year fully amortized loan at 15% interest.
Okay.
So I remember to this day, my payments to my investor were $2,378.99 per month. I had so many of those checks going out a month. I knew that number like the back of my hand.
Right.
So I acquired all these houses on that short-term loan, thinking the payday's coming. It's going to be a great day when all these homes are paid for. Like, it's going to be cash crazy. So I started getting to that point where they were starting to pay off in 2014. And then by 2014, but then what I realized was I would start driving past the houses and these were they're like falling down. I'm like, oh no, I'm going to have to go raise that money back just to put roofs on and windows in and gutters, and there was so much turnover and maintenance. It was insane, even in the Class C stuff.
Yeah.
So what I did was I decided it took me a couple more years to get a knock in the head. I decided I'm going to take half of those homes and sell them and pay off the existing debt on the 125. So what I did was I sold 100, and by January of 17, I had 125 doors with no debt on them.
Wonderful. Yeah. That's a smart thing that a lot of people look at that and they don't see that they're like, oh my God, I need to sell them all. No, you don't need to sell them all. You can sell enough to pay the rest off. And now you got some extra cash flow coming in from that. Well, fascinating. Now you talked about turnover. You said even though it's Class C, I would think that turnover in Class C is probably higher than in Class A or B. Wouldn't you think?
Yeah, there was some more turnover for sure.
And actually worse turnover, because I remember moving to Phoenix and renting an apartment here. And when we moved out of that apartment, we left that exactly like we found it, probably even cleaner than when we found it, because we were at the time Class A renters. It was a Class B property, but we were Class A people. So we left it in very, very clean. If I think about Class, like we just had 2 people move out of our Class C rentals that we have here in Phoenix, and they've been in those houses for 10 years. Unfortunately, it costs $25,000 to rehab those houses after they've been in the houses for 10 years. Because it's just, they never called for a service call exactly like that. Those houses cash flow $7,200 a month, a year for 10 years. So we made $72,000, but now we're giving back 25 of it in order to fix it. Now, on the good side is they've also put 10x in value. They're worth $400,000 now, these houses, when we bought them for 40. So it's all good, but good. I think the message that I want to bring home, would you agree that dealing in the Class C area has a perceived thing of like, oh, you get all this cash flow because you get the houses cheap and the rent is high, but it comes with a lot of extra unseen expenses that the world doesn't talk about, because the houses are 100 years old, the furnaces go out, the plumbing breaks, the people living there live on the houses rougher, and when they live there a few years, it's way more expensive to bring them back into good condition. Would you agree with all of these things?
I would, but I don't want to paint a picture that Class A assets are rock star either. You know,
fair point.
I'm a 25-year seasoned beat to death landlord. And I've had a lot of Class A property. And at one point I was managing for one of my private investors at that time who had a lot of Class A property. And I get very disgusted, to say the least. Okay. I had Class A property probably renting to Class C people in your example, you know. It wasn't great. And those Class A properties are a little bit bigger in size, which means it costs that much more to renovate them.
Yeah.
And in a market like Cleveland, Ohio, you know, there's only so high rents are going to go. This is a working class town. It's typically blue collar, and it's a little different. So I don't know. I'm a beat up landlord, Jack. I'm probably the wrong person to motivate anybody about rental properties. That's a good thing,
because again, that just means like that. So why are you a landlord?
So because I've been in the business 25 years. And as a young boy back in 1996, I was sold on the dream. They told me, meaning Carlton Sheets, Russ Whitney, watching those infomercials back as a 17-year-old boy in my parents' house, they told me if I buy rental property, I will be rich and rewarded beyond my wildest imagination. So that's all I've ever done. I got into the business at 18 years old. And I've never done anything but real estate. And that's what I bought into, was buy rentals and you're set for life.
Yeah. There's a good point to that there's some truth to that. It's just not going to happen overnight. Right?
It's not going to happen overnight. No.
Because in your case, you raise the money, you build up the portfolio to build to 200 something, 17 units. Then finally you paid off, once the values had increased, you sold off half to pay off the other half, and then the cash flow started coming in at least semi-decently, right?
Well, let's talk about that.
Okay, let's talk about that, right?
So this is a great story. It's about you, so this is perfect. So January 17, whole portfolio is paid for. I'm probably making $50,000 a month off those doors, net. I thought I arrived. And it was good money. It was a lot of work, still managing those doors. And I come to a Collective Genius Mastermind, and I see my dear friend, Jack Bosch. Hey, Jack, how are you? We're talking, and we talked about something. And you said to me, it's like, Jack, I got a portfolio of 125 doors. They're paid for. It's probably worth, I don't know, $9 million or something. And I have infinite cash flow because it's all paid for. Blah, blah. You go, that's good. That's good for ROI. And you said to me, well, what's your ROE? And I said, what is that? And you said return on equity. And that was the day everything changed for me. because I realized then making 600 grand on a $10 million portfolio, and 600 grand was probably on a good day, because there was a lot of months where I still would make $25,000 off all that rent.
All these extra furnaces and those things that keep breaking. Yes.
And that day changed for me. It took me a little while, because I'm a hard teach, but it took me a little while on that day in 2018. But then COVID hit and the property values really took off. So I decided to sell the lion's share of my portfolio, and I have been doing it the past couple of years. So I was able to really unlock.
Let's talk about that. But great
Mm-hmm.
point. So what's the difference between return on investment and return on equity? So I remember the conversation. I think we were in a bus somewhere going to some party on the in the evening that the host of the mastermind had organized, and we had like an hour to talk about it. And I think the bus got lost somewhere, and we ended up instead of 15 minutes speaking for an hour in that bus. And the concept of return of investment is like, great. You have a house that you bought for $100,000, and that's producing you, after everything's said, doesn't matter mortgage or not, producing you $500 a month in cash flow. Great. So you're making $6,000 a year on $100,000 investment. That's a 6% return on investment. That is great. You add to that depreciation. You add to that the appreciation over time and things like that. It's a good return. But the cash, you're making like 5 or 6% right now. Okay, that's good. Now, if that property goes up to, let's say, in a hot market, which is what happened between 2009 and 2020, prices in some markets doubled and many markets 10x or so. So now you have a property, let's say, that goes up to $400,000. And you're like, hey, it's free and clear. Let's say it's free and clear. And I'm making $600 a month. Well, it's great. I have 100 of these houses. I have a portfolio of $40 million, let's say, and I'm making $60,000 a year. The thing is, like, most people look at the $60,000 a month, not $60,000 a year, $60,000 a month. You're making $60,000 a month, and that's $700,000 a year. You're like, fantastic. I'm set. I'm good. But in the meantime, on what is the assets worth? The assets are in this scenario worth $40 million. And you're making $600,000 or $700,000 on $40 million. That's 1.75% return on your equity. Your equity is $40 million, or you take that same deal on a smaller deal. It doesn't matter. Like you have a house that's worth $100,000, then it becomes $200,000 and you're making $500. It's the same thing. Like it doesn't have to be like these huge numbers. Bottom line is, your return on investment is on the money you invested, but then when the values go up, that money can be used to liquidate in some shape or form and also can be put to work. So you could borrow money. So if you have a deal that is now worth, if you have $1 million worth of investment, it started with $200,000. Let's do a different example that's perhaps more relatable to our audience. So you have a house that's $200,000. It produces $500 a month. Great. But now that house goes to $1 million. It still only produces $500 a month. That's not a good return on $1 million. Right?
Exactly.
That's just not. $1 million, a 1% return on $1 million should be $10,000. If you make $6,000, if you make $6,000 a return on $1 million asset, you're getting 0.6% of a return of investment on equity. So the smarter thing in such a scenario is to either borrow a bunch of money out of it, which has a problem because you're still only getting $500 a month. Yep. And in that scenario, the better scenario would be to just sell the asset, take the $1 million, and go move into another market and buy yourself 5 houses that cost $500,000, that cost $200,000 each. And that each provides you now with $500 in cash flow. You just 5-fold increase your cash flow without really putting an extra dollar out of your pocket. And you now 5x your return on investment and in your return on equity in this scenario. Does that make sense? And I think that's the conversation we had, and that makes sense. It made you realize that you had $9 or $10 million worth of assets, and you're only making between $25,000 and $50,000 a month on them, and you're like, that's not that's not what I should be making here. I should be making much more. Right? That's a great insight. So good. I'm glad. So what did you do?
It was great.
What happened?
I sold everything. I started selling.
And then now you have cash sitting in a bank that produces nothing.
Up until recently, nothing. Now these banks are paying 4% and 5%, which is really cool. Right. But yes, for the most part, nothing. So I went into it thinking the banks were going to pay nothing. Correct.
Right. So that's not necessarily a better place, because now before you had an asset that was producing cash flow. Now you have no more assets and you have cash, and the cash produces nothing. So what did you do as the next step to actually make that cash produce something again? You guys got to live from something.
You have to. So I did two things. Instead of the fix and flips I was doing, I would borrow money on. I stopped borrowing money for my fix and flips. So
you also fix and flip, right? So just to be clear, you fix and flip too.
I've always done fix and flips. Okay. Never to the scale I'm doing now. Right. So this year I'll complete 86 fix and flips, which is a lot for me. Oh, wow. I think, and I self-fund that. So it's a huge amount of interest savings. Yeah. Hundreds and hundreds of thousands of dollars saved in interest by me self-funding. So it's very, very lucrative. I can buy deals that might be a little bit tighter. I can make quicker decisions. I love having this money to be able to do deals with. So I'm doing that big fix and flip business. And then I do just a little bit of private lending, because I really don't know private lending very well. And I don't do it right. That's for sure. I know real private lenders, they have origination fees and lender policies. I don't do any of that. Just kind of like, hey, you need some money? Sounds good. I'll send you a wire.
Right. Well, you do it a little more. You have lent us some money when we had some deals coming up. Like we had some multifamily deals, and we needed very short term, like $500,000 to still be able to, because investors' money was coming in later, and we needed. Yeah, we were like 2 weeks before closing, and we're $500,000 short because these 5 investors are bringing $100K in only 4 weeks from now. So, Joe, can you give us $500K against these free and clear houses? And you're like, exactly. Sure. And then we signed something. I mean, you do the proper process.
I did a little bit, yeah.
You helped us a few times on that to get to the finish line there. And then once the investor money came in, we just paid you back with your interest and so on.
It was awesome.
Let's talk about, I really like the idea of self-funding flips, because typically from your industry experience, what do you typically pay a hard money or a private money lender on their money for a flip?
I typically pay anyone like in my network 2 points and 12% interest.
Okay. So 2 points is like straight off, it's a 2% fee. So how much do you typically borrow when you typically use to buy and fix and flip a house?
About $200,000.
Okay, so $200,000. So by being able to self-funding it, you are not paying $4,000 in fees to the lender.
Yes,
and you're not paying 12%. Now, 12% of $200,000 is $24,000 for a year. But how long do you typically need the money for a fix?
About 9 months. About 9 months.
For 9 months. So basically, that's $18,000. So basically, 18 plus 4 is $22,000. So every single time that somebody that in the past you would borrow $200,000, you would have to pay about $22,000 back to that lender, which now you don't have to do anymore.
Which I can tell you, if I was borrowing money, it probably wouldn't be worth it.
Yeah. So that's a cool, really, really cool thing, because now in essence, what it means is that your money is producing about an 11% in 9 months. So about a 13% per year return by using it yourself for your own flips. Yes. Right? Brilliant.
It's
Love
huge.
It. Absolutely.
It wouldn't even be worth it. I probably wouldn't fix and flip if I had to borrow money, to be honest, because my average, I think this year, my average fix and flip, I made $34,000 on a fix and flip net. So take out that 22, I'm making what, 12?
Yeah.
I don't know how interested I would be to go through the hell of a fix and flip for $12,000.
Yeah, and that's what people forget, but because most people are not in your situation, which by the way didn't happen overnight. Just make sure you guys understand, right? We're in 2020, the end of 2023 right now. We're talking about you doing that for the last few years. You having bought out the other things at 2017, and then so it like. overnight success always takes 10 years, right? As they say.
At least. Yeah.
So, or in your case, 25 years you've been in the business. Obviously, you've done well.
Right.
You got the beach house. You got the Bentley. You still got the Bentley.
I do. Yeah, I love that thing.
So yeah, you've done well. But my point is, this has been an evolution, and that's why I wanted you to be on the podcast, because you're a straight up guy, and it's not just all roses and whatever else. And how do you say that? Patrick, how do you say it? Sunshine and roses and sunflowers, whatever you call that in English. I don't know. But it's hard work. And finally you got to the point, but even people who do fix and flip forget that. They watch HGTV and they see, we bought this house for $200,000. We sold it. We spent $75,000, or we bought it for $150,000. We spent $50,000 on rehab, and we sold it for $250,000. We made $50,000. No, you didn't.
No, you didn't.
Because you didn't account for the $22,000 going to the hard money lender. You didn't account for the realtor commission. You didn't account for any kind of surprises and things like that. And if you take that all off, you made $10,000 on a deal that took you 9 months of headaches and lending money and fixing, flipping, and crews and all those kind of things. That's why, by the way, that's why we flip land anyway. But that's just
I don't blame you.
Fantastic, man! 87 deals right now this year. That is big time. Yeah. That is a big operation.
It's good.
How many people do you have work? How many crews do you got working on for that?
So that's 4 full-time crews that are doing that with 4 project managers. So that's been the big thing for me, is each crew has a project manager. So I'm not involved in day-to-day operations. I just work with my acquisitions team to buy the houses, and I'm the one going to the bank, wiring money, things like that.
Yeah.
That's been huge for me. So
to perhaps let's close out that thing of when I said you bought almost 20 houses for me. My experience with those houses, we did it a little bit different. Perhaps we can talk about that a little bit. When you showed us Cleveland, you showed us one of these ghetto-ologist houses. And there wasn't even proper flooring in them. And you said you would still put the flooring in and so on. But these things were creaking and everything. The windows were crooked in there. And it would have cost a fortune to fix all of that, yet way more than the house was worth. So I was like, I'm not interested in those kind of houses. I didn't want to deal with that. And then so we said, well, what's the next step out? And the next step out. And eventually we settled on a suburb of Cleveland that shall be unnamed, but in a suburb of Cleveland where we basically realized the houses also were like 80 to 100 years old. They were also bungalow style houses, but it's where nurses, nurses, police officers, and just like this mid-level and like economic mid-level of the society, the hardworking American people were living there, and it was low crime, and it is safe neighborhoods, and the city had lots of inspectors out there to my chagrin, but actually not a negative thing. Like if something would fall off, you would get a call from the city within 2 weeks and saying like, hey, this doesn't look good, you got to fix it. And we had very little issues with the tenants during that time. So we bought 2014, 15, 16, 17 or so. We just bought like 5 houses a year or so, bought like 20 houses. And then we sold them all last year. Like we sold them kind of like just when the interest rates were still low and on the run of the interest rate. We sold them all. And I have to say, cash flow wise, we made very little money on these rental houses. So again, we bought them, I think was like around 60 usually, 55 to 65. Then you took over, you and your guys, you fixed them up for us. So on average, we had about $70,000 in them. We would get about $1,000 in rent. And again, but invariably, because they're so old, every month there was like a furnace that burned out, or plumbing issue, or foundation issue, or anything kind of things. It seems like the cash flow would always disappear. Yep. So at some point of time, we're like, you know what? That was a nice experiment, but let's go sell them. And then I was actually surprised because prices had doubled from there when we sold them all for an average about $140,000 a house. some some for like 160, 170, one somewhere 130. So probably more like an average of 150. And we ended up making about a 20% year after year return if I add it all together. That's not bad, right? But not bad. I think I'm down to like having 1 or 2 houses there right now with just a few people that just don't want to move. And selling a house with a tenant in it is never such a good idea. So we're just holding on to those. So Joe, you helped me with every single one of those. We have and continue to be a really great trust relationship there, where you simply would take them, pay for them. We would wire you the money and so on. But again, this is the kind of people that you want to look for in the industry. Like Joe, you and I, we never had a written contract about this.
No, we didn't.
We never had. We simply wired you the money to pay for the houses. Some of them you even put into your name first because it was easier, because you bought them from the courthouse steps. It was easier. Then you fixed them up. We paid for everything, and at the end you put them back into our names. That is like crazy to do stuff like that. I would not recommend you guys watching this. I would not recommend you do that with anyone. But it worked between the two of us, and Michelle obviously involved. Worked between the three of us, because we knew each other for years. We were part in the same mastermind. We know there's a code of ethics that if you screw us, obviously the world would know about it, and nobody in this entire room would do business, like very well networked room. Obviously, that was never an issue because we just had gotten to know each other so well over the years that it was like, yeah, Joe, want to do this? Let's do this. So I'm an old style, you were both kind of in the old style kind of thing that we're doing a handshake deal. And I wish there would be more people in the world that we could do that with. But I want to thank you for being that person, and thank you for being for being able to do that. Because in the process, I mean, on those 20 deals, we made a good $1 million, 1.5 or so, $1.5 million, and just basically on a handshake, which is really, really cool.
That's awesome. Thank you. I enjoyed it. Every minute of that. It was awesome.
So with that said, Joe, just one perhaps last part that we want to cover is, what do you see the outlook of where's real estate for you right now? I mean, you're gonna do it forever, but in terms of like, where do you see the market going? What do you see happening? Are these interest rates affecting you? They're 7.5%, 8% interest rates that you're putting a brand new product on the market at the end of the day, completely rehab properties, looking beautiful. What are you seeing? What is your take on the market right now?
So prices are still relatively high here in Cleveland. We haven't seen too much of a dip. We are, like right now, though, we are seeing people starting to negotiate a little bit more.
Okay.
You know, they're negotiating, I'm going to say on average 10% off of list, which is kind of unheard of over the last 4 or 5 years. That really didn't happen. So seeing that, it's going to be interesting to see where the market goes, because although the rates are high, there's still not a ton of inventory, but we're still not seeing buyers just jumping into these deals either. So it's low inventory, and the buyers are kind of sitting on the sidelines. So now this only applies to Cleveland, Ohio, because I can tell you, I'm right now in the process of looking for a home in Windermere, Florida. And if anyone knows that area down there, it doesn't seem like anybody cares about money down there. So I can't get one. So I don't know. They're just buying. But I'm just talking Cleveland. So we'll see what happens. But I'm gonna continue to fix and flip. I like doing it. I've made the most. So you're
adjusting your buying criteria based on that? Because if people are discounting by 10%, that's your profit margin right there potentially. So are you correcting it on the buying side of things?
We absolutely are buying deeper. I tell my acquisition guys, we have to buy deeper. Yeah. So I think we're going to switch a little. I think we're going to add in a little bit of hoteling, a little more hoteling right now. Just kind of cleaning them up a little bit, knocking the scary off, and putting them on the MLS. See if we can pass off a deal with some equity to somebody. And we're going to try that approach for a little while and see what happens.
All right. So you always got to adjust. Always got to adjust. Go from ghetto-ologist, which was a great strategy. I mean, could somebody implement that strategy still today?
Absolutely. Yeah. You run it with an iron fist, you'll do very well.
Yeah, exactly. Because I remember you're going out there with a gun on your side to pick up rent, right?
Very scary. Yeah. Real stuff.
What's the worst? What's the worst? Let's end this with a real shocking story. Like, what's the worst kind of thing that happened to you during those ghetto-ologist days? I just want to get back to that.
Oh gosh, there's so many stories. So I'm in the ghetto one day, and you ever hear those stories about police officers have been police officers for like 30 years, and the one day they don't wear their vest, they get shot or killed in the line of duty? It's like, I wore it for 30 years, and the one day I don't, I get killed in the line of duty. Well, similar, not compare myself to a police officer. Their job is very hard and all that. But one day I went to the ghetto and I didn't bring my gun. I used to have a gun on my hip, and I didn't. And it just so happened that day I was at an apartment building I owned. I owned a 48-unit apartment building at that time. And I go there to meet with my manager. And just so happens that somebody let someone in the door who got released from the psych ward or something from a hospital. He had a PICC line in his arm, and he was on, this is things you learn in the ghetto, he was on wet. Now, if you don't, do you know what wet is?
No idea.
It's wet is when someone inhales, huffs, however they do it, embalming fluid.
Okay.
Yeah. It gets you, if you can't get drugs, you do that, and it makes you crazy. You go out of your mind. So this guy approaches, he comes into the hallway of the building, and my manager and I are there, and his eyes are coming out of his head. And he's kind of a big guy. I mean, he's about 6 foot. I'm 6 foot, so we're about the same size, but I'm like, oh my gosh, this guy's trying to start a problem. He wanted something. And I go to grab him to like push him back, and I could feel his strength. He had like superhuman strength, right? Like whatever he was on, like I knew right when I grabbed him, and I had adrenaline going, that I wasn't gonna be able to take this guy. Like I didn't know what to do. I didn't have a gun on me. So I ran back to our little maintenance center, and I grab a hammer. I'm like, I'm gonna have to hit him with a hammer, like in the head. And I remember walking back, my building manager's kind of tied up with him, and I got this hammer, and I'm kind of going like this, feeling the hammer, because the hammer didn't feel very heavy to me. Like usually a hammer would have some weight to it, like it doesn't feel heavy. Maybe it's gonna have an adrenaline rush. But I came to find out later, it didn't feel heavy to me because it was a hammer that was bought at the dollar store. Okay. So it was a dollar store hammer. So it didn't have any weight. Right. So I'm walking and I'm thinking, I'm going to hit him, and it's just going to make him madder at me, right? Like it's not going to do anything. It's like a little, like almost like a fake hammer. So I'm freaking out. I'm like, this isn't going to work. I drop the hammer, and I see my building manager kind of tied up with him. And he looks at me, I look at him, and I just push him out this steel door and pull my manager back in, and I pulled the door shut. And at that point, he was on the outside. We were on the inside. And I was like, oh my gosh. Okay. All right. He can't get back in, lock the building down. And then within a few minutes, like 3 police officers ended up pulling up to the building. They drew down on him, and they didn't shoot him, but they had him in cuffs, and away he went. That was probably one of the scariest things ever happened to me. Okay, now, if I would have had a gun, though, probably wouldn't have been a good day for that gentleman.
So now here's Joe driving his Bentley to his lake house, looking for a place in Windermere, Florida to go with a family and things like that. But sometimes in business and life, particularly in real estate, you got to be ready to be prepared to face some difficult situations. Now, of course, if you choose the ghetto-ologist route. But I mean, I've never experienced anything like that, but I would expect that if you're dealing in that market, you'll come across a few things like that. And I'm sure there's many more for them. So thank you for sharing that. So I hope we didn't scare people away from real estate here. If anything, we perhaps showed you that there's so freaking many different ways that you can skin this cat. Did you ever think about going into the ghetto and buying $20,000, $30,000 houses and renting them Section 8? No, but you can if you're willing to pay the price that comes with it of dealing with that, with some of the drug issues and things that happen in those neighborhoods. You can build up a portfolio, sell it, make the money, and then use that money for further things. So there's an evolution here that I wanted to highlight out of this in this podcast today that really took you. You're no longer the ghetto-ologist. You're a fix and flipper, and you're the most independent fix and flipper now, because the hard things you did in the past allow you to now run a really tight ship on fix and flipping without using anyone else's money. Congratulations. I think that's really, really beautiful. You. That's fantastic. And yeah, so Thank you, Joe, for being on the show with us. Do you have any?
Thanks.
Do you have any last words that you want to share with our audience?
Oh man, for anyone in real estate or whatever, just always invest in your education. That was one of my biggest mistakes that I didn't do the first 12 years of business. And once you invest in yourself and your education, you can just go further faster. It's amazing when you get out there and do different things. The relationships you have are lifelong relationships, because it's really just a small world, and it's great to be around people who are like you. And it can get lonely at the top, as they say. So you want to be around great people all the time that encourage you and motivate you. And I always take a look at who's my closest to me, who's in that bullseye area. And it's a great life, just enjoy it. Real estate has given me more than I ever thought it possibly could. So if anyone, do it. It's awesome. It's well worth it.
Wonderful. Thank you very much, Joe. With that said, guys, if you enjoyed that, with our resident former ghetto-ologist, now self-sufficient fix and flipper, Joe Lieber, give us a 5-star review, share it with your friends. Thank you very much. Bye-bye.